don't think many people saw this in the script. I think what most people thought, including myself, was that Pep signing the new deal over the international break would pretty much start the season, and it would be the start of City potentially retaining the title and doing 5 in a row. It's not out of the ordinary to think the Spurs were going to go in and win this game, but to win 4-0, 5 defeats in a row for the first time in Pep's career, the worst home loss of his entire career, it's stunning, mental, shocking, any extreme adjective you could use to describe the game, feel free, because all of them are applicable. Now, is it as much as a 4-0 as maybe the scoreline suggests? No. And if Haaland puts away a couple of early chances, who knows how the game goes from there, but you can't really look at the ifs and buts and the whens and who could have and what could have. You can only judge and analyse what happened, and not everything's going to go right. So when Haaland misses those few early chances, how do you then cope with the rest of the 80 minutes where Spurs were going to be relentless? Spurs didn't do anything I felt like that would surprise you from an attacking point of view. Defensively, there was a few differences, but we know how they play attacking wise. They invert the fullbacks. They play with extreme high tempo and try and get the pace in behind, with some slight alterations that caught City off. And we'll go on to the City attacking phase first, because I feel like that's where there's probably a few more talking points. This isn't an unusual system for City, but it's not one we've really seen this season, and that was a 2-3-2-3. And that wouldn't be with the fullback staying a bit deeper. That would be with Gvardiol and Walker pushing high up, trying to provide the attacking width in the opposition's half. Savinho and Foden, who would start from out wide, would come inside. Foden would come in a little bit more centrally, as opposed to Savinho, who would stick into his left half space. Bernardo Silva and Rico Lewis would take up more sort of inverted full-back positions, sort of deeper midfield positions to create the three alongside Gundogan. Bernardo Silva, again, I feel like would make more effort to come out into a left-back position. Rico Lewis would stick a little bit more centrally inside. And you get Solanke pressing Stones to start off with, who could then look to play it to Akanji, where Solanke could shadow the run from Stones into Akanji and try and win the ball back that way. Where that became harder and where this did disrupt Spurs' shape is Maddison's role was designed to look after Gundogan, and Gundogan didn't get as involved in the build-up play as maybe he usually would from a more advanced position. So that wasn't really somewhere they could play through. Gundogan wasn't really agile enough to find new positions and try and outmaneuver Maddison. Maddison did a really good job in the pressing phase. But Edison, as he's wont to do, would get involved and provide that extra number. So it left Solanke with a 3-on-1. And as much as he is a very good presser, he's not covering all those three by himself. So that would then invite Kulusevski coming in from his position on Bernardo Silva, as Son would come in inside on the left-hand side to try and take care of Rico Lewis. The one fault I had with Kulusevski in this is it didn't feel like he was doing enough to shadow his run in from Silva to Akanji. And it felt like Akanji could just pop that ball into Silva to get the play started. And shadowing is important in these regards, especially when there wasn't anyone really near enough to pick up the slack. So at points it was just a bit too narrow, a bit too central coming up to Akanji, and he could play that pass in. This did bring in Pape Matar Sarr, though, who, with Basuma, had sort of a dual role to take care of Savinho and Foden in the half spaces in the 10 positions. But he would also be entrusted to back up that press, especially if Bernardo Silva or Lewis was a bit more central. Then he could just narrow it up and provide a bit more congestion in that middle area. And he would look to come into this area. So let's say if Akanji had pulled wide, suckering Kulusevski in, then Silva could make that movement inside to receive the ball. Sarr would come up and press alongside Maddison. So it required a lot of stamina, a lot of energy, which Pape Matar Sarr has, to be fair. He's a fantastic player off the ball with his energy and his athleticism and his willingness. But, those moments of transition, the moment where one pass comes from a player into space as he's going to press, is enough time for this City team to just pop it off into areas around the corner with their technical quality and get their attack started. And this did leave Basuma in a bit of trouble, as he was tasked with Savinho and Foden. With Foden, as I was just saying, coming in a lot more centrally, with Savinho sticking more into a left half space, it left that right hand space a little bit freer, as Rico Lewis sort of, again, had a bit of a dual position going in from the deeper area into the more advanced area. It just left that opening for him to do so. And it meant that they could overload this right-hand side. And the fullbacks for Spurs had a bit of trouble to deal with. So let's use Pedro Porro for an an example, he had Gvardiol and Savinho coming in. Does he stay in narrow to make sure that Savinho doesn't get the time and space on the ball, or does he stay out wide to mark the run of Gvardiol? And obviously, Udogie had a similar issue on the left-hand side with Walker. It was more a threat on the left-hand side because of Foden's position. Foden wasn't offering Walker the support that Savinho was on that left-hand side by design. That's not a fault of Foden. And as a result, Porro's positioning left him in a lot more central. He was more concerned, I think, with sticking close to Dragazin, keeping more of a compact back four for Spurs, and it meant that Gvardiol had a bit more space that he could receive the ball. And to be fair, when Spurs would look to press high, if Gvardiol came in deeper to offer a solution in the build-up, let's say if Silva came in narrow, that would be a trigger for Porro to come in and press high and try and get against him and be aggressive in winning the ball back high. But when he was in his more settled defensive back four shape and where basically Spurs just couldn't allow Haaland to get a lot of space either side of the centre-back pairing, which was obviously makeshift with Dragazin and Ben Davies not being Spurs' first choice. But Gvardiol getting the ball in this position here was a danger for Manchester City, caused Pedro Porro to have to make a decision. And if he did come across, then that left space for Savinho to receive the ball in these areas that he could run off of the back of his marker, let's say Sarr getting back, who would get back really well. He was a fantastic recoverer. Maddison getting back, Son getting back, Kulusevski on the chase back. Again, all did their job fantastically, but all this City team need is half a second, and with Savinho's burst of pace with the ball at his feet. And naturally, this would cause the Spurs shape to come across. Haaland, I feel like, did a really good job of just sticking a bit to the far post to occupy Ben Davies a little bit and keep maybe a bit more of a gap between Davies and Dragazin. As Dragazin would look to come across to Pedro Porro, that space would be created. And this is where you'd see Phil Foden making these runs into this area here to receive the ball either from Savinho or Gvardiol and just find little passes in behind where he could then get a goal-scoring opportunity for himself or play it to Haaland. The finishing for City, as I was saying before, was really poor at a really poor level, and Foden and Haaland didn't take their chances well enough when it was presented. And Spurs, to be fair, as the game wore on, did drop into a much better defensive phase, as I'll speak about now. Spurs would drop back into a 4-1-4-1. Again, still had the issue of Basuma having to mark a bit too much space on his own in between the lines against Savinho and Foden. Haaland would also drop in a little bit deeper to create an option to pass through. Again, he's not the most technically proficient with his first touch and his passing range, but he did offer another threat, and he wasn't terrible in this area of the pitch in this game, Haaland, to be fair to him. Again, Sarr and Maddison doing really good jobs in their respective half-space areas. City's initial phase would be a 2-3. You could also turn it into a 3-2, as Bernardo Silva did like to drop into the left-back position to help try and progress the play. And it was still the same way they were going to hurt Spurs City. It was the same sort of game plan from a deeper build-up phase to a more attacking one. Find Gvardiol on the left-hand side, who was in space because of Porro's narrow positioning, Savinho and Foden dragging him in, and either use that overload in this area to create clear goal-scoring opportunities or drag the defence along further into this area that created space on the right-hand side that they could play the ball over to Kyle Walker, which didn't really work out that well at all. Sometimes the passes wasn't right. Sometimes Kyle Walker's lack of a yard of pace was a hindrance, and they couldn't unlock Spurs this way. Again, these openings, Phil Foden attacking the space in behind, the gaps appearing in defence, the gaps appearing in midfield, did catch Spurs out in the first 10 or 15 minutes, and City, again, on another day, could have been 2 or 3-0 up pretty quickly. But they weren't, and Spurs, as the game went on, started defending a lot better. Still the narrowness of the back four, but Maddison, Sarr, and Basuma stayed a lot more central to each other. They were a lot more deeper, a lot more compact, and all of them defended fantastically. There was a bit more quality from City when they brought on the likes of Kevin De Bruyne and Jack Grealish, but again, not enough to really hurt Spurs. And if we transition it into the Spurs attacking phase, you can do that right now, actually. And because of the fact that the fullbacks were caught so high up the pitch, the 2 goals in the second half of Spurs came from this type of situation where they were deep, soaking up pressure to then have the pace on the break and the power and the running ability of these players that if they won the ball back, Kyle Walker and Gvardiol weren't going to get back in quick enough because the amount of room they have to cover. Well, Gvardiol's not the quickest. Kyle Walker's lost that yard of pace. And physically and athletically, this remaining 3 for City just could not cope. They didn't have the athleticism, they didn't have the physicality to win the duels when Spurs broke away with quality. Solanke offered a really good counter-attacking target to be able to play the ball to where he could hold it up and lay it off and get running in behind and bother City centre-backs. He could ride 2 or 3 challenges at once because, as I say, just that lack of physical quality that City had in the team. So transitionally in the second half, that's where they got their 2 goals and it was all to plan, and full credit to Ange. And now we're going to go on to the main Spurs attacking phase. Sorry if that was a bit of a sudden cut. I'm recording this hours later. Do you care? Did you notice anything? Probably not. Just thought I'd mention it. The Spurs, the way they build up, nothing new. They don't, generally alternate the way they play in these build-up stages. It's the 2-3-2-3 with the fullbacks invert closely to Basuma. Maddison and Sarr pushed up into the wide 10 positions. City were pressing high, 4-4-2, and it fell apart pretty quickly for City, it has to be said. And it fell apart initially very quickly, and the reason for that is the front two, Haaland and Foden, were both tasked with pressing onto the centre-backs, Dragusin and Ben Davies, and they would split very wide, creating a lot of space in between Haaland and Foden, both of which aren't great in the pressing stages. Haaland, because he's just not a very good presser, he's not the most intense with his press. Foden can lose concentration a bit, and he also doesn't have the physicality to win his duels. So if they were a yard off, it felt like Davis and Dragusin could get the ball at their feet, turn and play a pass upwards. But they also had little solutions, Spurs. One would be Basuma would be more than happy coming into this deeper area to get on the ball and help progress the play. Very comfortable on the ball. Basuma technically press resistant. And he had Bernardo Silva coming up from midfield to press onto him, creating a bit of a 4-3-3 for City. But he was very comfortable in these earlier build-up stages, and Vicario as well, who would provide an extra number that outnumbered City's front press, so they could play out fairly well there. As I said, a Doggy and Pedro Porro in these inverted fullback areas. Spurs wouldn't look to build up on the right-hand side. It was the left-hand side where they were going to get the most joy for a couple of reasons. One is with Udogie and Maddison in this position here, they had a way that they could sort of beat City's shape and their press through technical quality and athleticism. And more often than not, you'd see this. Udogie pushed high up alongside even Solanke and Son, with Maddison dropping in a little bit deeper. And you'd even sometimes see a 2-4-4 from Spurs, with Maddison dropping alongside Basuma to create that, with Udogie still in his typical left-back position. And just having Maddison in this position gave him the opportunity that if he started off centrally, Udogie could drop in and offer support. If then Maddison then moved out wider with the ball, Udogie could move inside, and there was a good relationship. There's been a good relationship between these two players since both of them came into the Spurs team. And Rico Lewis's initial target was that he would be the one to go and press Destiny Udogie in this position here, coming up, and it would leave Ilkay Gundogan in acres of space. And Gundogan didn't cope with it well, but also he's not built to play this single pivot defending so much space. Rodri would struggle with this much space. So this is why I'm not so keen to say it's a Rodri issue. Of course, that's going to have an effect. And they're going to lose more games without Rodri than they would with him. So of course that's a factor. But even he would struggle in the amount of space he was left with. Bernardo Silva coming in to the more forward areas. Rico Lewis getting dragged out into this position here. Maddison then making movements off of Udogie, or Udogie making movements off of Maddison into this area here, really did disrupt that City shape, and you'd start seeing the runs of Basuma off of Silva, who wouldn't be as switched on athletically to then get into this space here. Gundogan would be left in no man's land. Maddison could pull into the half space, and then Spurs could really get going in this position, and they could really quicken the attack up, finding players in behind, because City would push up pretty high, and it was all about that left side of the pitch for Spurs. Walker couldn't come and engage as Son was pinning him back in this wider area, and if Maddison and Udogie couldn't break out of this area, maybe Gundogan would come across, and Savinho would also try and come across to help outnumber the midfield, and leaving maybe Pedro Porro was the free man on this far side. But the idea is when you press and you try and force him over to one side and squeeze him, it's going to be hard for him to get a pass out to that far side. So that didn't really cause a much of an issue. But let's just say if they did wrap up Maddison and Udogie well, then Basuma on the ball here, or maybe one of the centre-backs, let's say if Foden got caught in between, Davis could turn outside, Udogie would make a subtle movement inside, dragging Rico Lewis with him, and Son could drop in a little bit deeper, dragging Kyle Walker in, and again, that space would be opened up. Udogie and Maddison could then use that to their advantage, maybe even John Stones coming across Solanke. So the space was going to get created in the defence, and Spurs had the athleticism to really punish City, and there was space in behind where they could fire those balls into. And again, like Bernardo Silva I just touched on, when Rico Lewis and Ilkay Gundogan would lose their markers, or they'd find themselves in front of play, let's say Maddison or Udogie getting the ball in between the lines here, their recovery was so poor. So poor. They wouldn't catch up with the markers. It was a very much lack of intensity type situation for them to try and keep up with the man on the ball. Again, Gundogan is a little bit more forgivable because of his age and his profile. Rico Lewis should be snapping into that. He should be chasing back and snapping a leg if need be. And it's not just the athleticism, it's not just the energy levels that they struggle with. Physically, this team is not set up to win their duels. Rico Lewis and Gundogan aren't physically at the level of these aren't physically at the level of Basuma. Even Madison can hold on to the ball under pressure pretty well. Son, so they're not going to win their duels from an athletic point of view. They're not going to win it from an aggression or physical point of view. So they were second best in all aspects of the pitch. And as well, with the aforementioned spread of the City midfield and the gaps that would appear, you'd also sometimes get Solanke dropping in real deep to try and get on the ball and uses back to goal play to lay it off to a supporting member, or just to turn and maybe ply it out to the wide areas, get Son one-on-one with Kyle Walker. Sometimes you'd have John Stones coming up with him, and a lot of times though we wouldn't, and it would just be Solanke coming in to an already congested centre area to just really put that City midfield to shame. And Son getting in the wide area against Kyle Walker one-on-one. As much as we talk about Son's lack of pace, I think we can see who's winning the race to lose the race of their pace first. That was a weird way of saying it, wasn't it? I think that made sense. Hopefully it translated well. And Son had Kyle Walker with that little bit of acceleration to take him around, to take around the outside or inside to create opportunities, even coming inside where he created the second goal for Madison. Got a few crosses away that Spurs didn't get on the end of, and he created some really good opportunities that way, which won't show up on any stat sheet because there wasn't a connection, but he did put a number of good balls in. Kulusevski on this side as well would be the direct option if they felt like they needed to switch the play quickly. Again, that space in behind gave him the license to run in behind. And Gvardiol struggled with him. Defensively, I do think Gvardiol is starting to get a little bit overhyped. I think he's attacking-wise really good. A great right foot on him that he can pick up a number of goals and assists. And he's useful in the sense that he can play a number of roles on a pitch. He's tactically versatile. He still struggles defensively for me. I still think he's way off being the best left-back in the world. And let's not forget, that shouldn't be a weakness because he was signed as a centre-back. So... And the first goal was poor on Gvardiol. And the second goal as well, when he's giving the ball away and he's not recovering well enough under the Spurs press. He really struggled with Kulusevski. Take nothing away from Kulusevski and the creation and his quality and his impact on the game. And his impact on Spurs over the last few months, he was excellent. Fantastic ball for the first goal. And more than earned his stripes when he won his individual battle against Gvardiol. And again, it wasn't just the athletic deficiencies of the fullbacks for Manchester City. Once they would get into the wide areas, you'd start seeing Madison running off of Gundogan, running off of Lewis, running off of Bernardo Silva. Even Sarr, who was fantastic as well, I shouldn't leave him out. An engine, a battler, second ball opportunities, recycling it to keep attacks going and sustaining pressure on Manchester City, and then recovering well. As I was speaking about before, he had that dual role in the pressing stages. And the midfield for City just couldn't cope with the running power of Madison and Sarr, who did fantastic jobs off the ball. Solanke as well, with his physicality holding the ball up, making movements that pulled players away and created space. So it was a perfect attacking situation for Spurs, and City's physical deficiencies and athletic deficiencies cost them. And that's not just a Rodri issue. That's bigger than Rodri. It's probably got a lot to do with the fact that, if not in their 30s, close enough to where it's a little bit of a concern. This team feels like it's growing altogether, and they're not keeping up with the pace and intensity of what's required in the league this season, because a lot of teams play such high energy, high intensity football, and they're just not at the level that they once were. And it does feel like this is coming up to a rebuild. And I'm not sure some of the young players they've got coming through are able to take the position of the players they're replacing. So it's why you're still in this weird middle ground, this purgatory of Kyle Walker's not performing, but does Rico Lewis offer the qualities that Kyle Walker's decline is limiting him in? Probably not. So this is a balancing act for Guardiola. Of course, injuries haven't helped, but Spurs were without their centre-back pairing today. Dragusin and Davies came in. So how far can injuries really stretch for City? If Liverpool beat Southampton today, which by the time you watch this, you'll know the result, and then if they go and beat City next weekend, is this title over for City? This might be the earliest exit of the Premier League, or a title race in general, that Pep's ever seen. But it's going to be a long week for City Champions League as well. They've got to bounce back, and they've got to bounce back quick. This is a rare situation for Pep, but he's come out smelling the roses before. We'll see. It's going to be a fun one. I'm really nervous as a United fan. Nothing about this situation feels good. But let us know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like the video if you liked it. Dislike it if you disliked it. Comment down below and tell me why either way. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you next time, lads. In a bit.